On January 29, 1969, almost 2 years after his arrest, Clay Shaw went on trial for conspiracy in the killing of President John F. Kennedy.
We knew he would commit perjury. While we felt we would win the first case, we knew that he had to lie about his associations with Oswald and Ferry, and that's where we had our strongest witnesses.
Some of Garrison's strongest witnesses placing Shaw and Oswald together came from the small town of Clinton. Months before the assassination, Shaw, in creating a background for Oswald, had tried to get him a job at a state mental institution. To qualify for such a job, though, Oswald first had to be a registered Democrat. Mark Lane said the day Shaw drove Oswald to register, they accidentally encountered black civil rights workers also trying to register while being heckled by members of the White Citizens Council.
And all of a sudden, this big black limousine came into town, and the KKK and their friends in the sheriff's department thought this must be the FBI. They're probably on the side of these black people, and the black protesters knew that this car did not belong to them, and we're sure that this must be part of the operation against them, and everybody studied the car. Everybody. And they all looked in the car, and they all saw Shaw, and they all saw Oswald.
Garrison tried to subpoena Allen Dulles and Richard Helms of the CIA so they could be questioned about Oswald's or Shaw's involvement with the agency. Federal officials declined to serve them, and only as a result of another subpoena was Garrison able to obtain the film of Abraham Zapruder. A jury of American citizens would see the Zapruder film for the first time in its entirety. Nearly 12 years later, Dallas-Fort Worth journalist Gary Mack made available to the House Select Committee on Assassinations the dictabelt of motorcycle officer H.B. McLean, which Mack discovered had, on the day of the assassination, accidentally recorded at least 4 gunshots.
All any intelligent person, even a child, has to do is look at the Zapruder film. After the shot hits him in the head, the critical shot, John Kennedy goes backwards towards the back of the car. So he's almost blown out of the back of the car. John Kennedy was obviously shot from the front. Everybody knows it, and especially the government.
There was a great feeling of depression among the news media. I'm talking about this established news media, because Garrison had pierced the bubble of which the news media had encased the case in.
Compelling as the film is, and as believable as Garrison's witnesses were, one witness, his staff agrees, cost him the case. Charles Speisel.
The question I posed to Jimmy is, didn't anyone talk to this guy before you put him on the stand?
An accountant in New York City who had said that he had met Shaw and Oswald at a party.
We had no idea that he had this sort of background or would admit to this sort of background.
On cross-examination, this accountant testified that when his daughter came back to him from Louisiana, instead of saying, "Hello, darling," he brought her into the room in his apartment and fingerprinted her, and then checked the fingerprints against those on file to make sure it was really his own daughter, and that the government had not substituted a duplicate for her. The jury heard this, and this was the end.
I have always felt that he was one of those plants.
The case had been destroyed by calling that one witness. I did go to the Hall of Records in Louisiana and found out that that building had, at the time this gentleman said he met Shaw and Oswald there, been owned by Clay Shaw.
In another surprise, Judge Haggerty would not allow Aloysius Habegorst, the booking officer, to testify that while being routinely booked, Clay Shaw said his alias was Clay Bertrand. On March 1st, 1969, the jury acquitted Clay Shaw. Polled afterwards, most jurors felt there had been a conspiracy to kill President Kennedy, but there was insufficient evidence to link Clay Shaw to it. Since Shaw had denied under oath knowing either Ferry or Oswald, Garrison then moved to try him for perjury.
In a move which is, I still think, highly illegal and probably unprecedented, the local federal courts gave an order that we could not prosecute him. Reasons are still obscure, but they blocked the prosecution, and it would have been an absolute certainty of conviction.
We think of the Scopes case today as a great victory. Clarence Darrow lost that case.
A few years after the trial, a photograph surfaced which showed three men at a party identified as David Ferry, Clay Shaw, and Lee Harvey Oswald.
If you had it to do over again, would you launch another investigation?
Yes, I would have to, because once you know that something was hidden, once you know what happened, then you have no choice.
Media and city leaders called for Garrison's resignation. The voters re-elected him. With Garrison still in a legal position to pursue the case, the government pursued him.
We were hounded, harassed by a variety of government assets and agencies. The FBI, for example.
He was prosecuted himself on two separate occasions after the trial of Clay Shaw. Once he was charged with accepting a bribe. In essence, he not only won that case and was totally exonerated, but it was nevertheless the springboard for the next case, which basically was that he failed to report income, and pay income tax on the bribe, which he had never received, and he won that case as well.
The unbelievable stress of the past 2 years accentuated problems in the marriage. Jim and his wife, Liz, divorced.
There were pressures that my wife felt, and so each one of us had to end up being an entirely different person, although she was relatively easy to live with, a very sweet person. So, but I think it was a weight on the scale, certainly.
My mother has always wanted just a close family, you know, a normal family life for her kids, and there was no way that a normal family could exist in that situation. But I'm sure it put a lot of pressure on it. But as to say that that was the exact or the only reason, I don't know.
Too busy defending himself to function efficiently as district attorney, Garrison lost in his bid for a third term. He spent 4 years in private practice, wrote a novel, and won election to the Louisiana Fourth Circuit Court of Appeal. In his second term, he ran unopposed.
And I realized I was suddenly an object of interest to the agency. I guess I might have assumed that earlier, but it didn't occur to me. I guess part of me still thought I was living in the country I was born in. So the conclusion I would give you was they did everything they could to tear the office apart, to tear the trial apart. And they did tear the trial apart. But the time came when I was no longer district attorney. Whatever their explicit objectives were, they accomplished them. But I would have to reply. On the other hand, the agency, when it was all over, they knew they'd been danced with.
On July 18, 1979, the House Select Committee on Assassinations concluded there had been a conspiracy to kill President John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King. The House Select Committee conclusions finally vindicated Jim Garrison and the other critics of the Warren Report. Jim Garrison, who retired from the bench in October 1991, just short of his 70th birthday, may have found greater vindication, though, not from Washington, but from Hollywood. Oliver Stone made JFK based in part on Jim Garrison's investigation and prosecution of Clay Shaw. Whatever flaws critics said the film had, it brought to the people a perspective on the assassination not explored or avoided by the nation's media. It also brought consolation and hope to Jim Garrison's children.
There's so much criticism of it because they're saying it distorts history, but what's the alternative except the Warren Commission is history? I hope it succeeds in at least letting people know that something wasn't right and they should be more skeptical of what their government tells them and what they read in the papers.
I wish I could say in heroic words that yes, I would do it again, but actually what the investigation cost me, a magnificent office which took years to build up, and a tremendous amount of emotional involvement, not unrelated to my personal concern about what happened to John Kennedy and what was obviously happening to America. I'd say that I don't know if I would do it again because of the emotional price I paid.
Jim Garrison said he never felt like a hero. Being DA, he was just doing his job.
But this car did not belong to them, and we're sure that this must be part of the operation against them, and everybody studied the car. Everybody. And they all looked in the car, and they all saw Shaw, and they all saw Oswald.
Garrison tried to subpoena Allen Dulles and Richard Helms of the CIA so they could be questioned about Shaw, and creating a background for Oswald, had tried to get him a job at a state mental institution. To qualify for such a job, though, Oswald first had to be a registered Democrat. Mark Lane said the day Shaw drove Oswald to register, they accidentally encountered black civil rights workers also trying to. On January 29, 1969, almost 2 years after his arrest, Clay Shaw went on trial for conspiracy in the killing of President John F. Kennedy.
We knew he would commit perjury. While we felt we would win the first case, we knew that he had to lie about his associations with Oswald and Ferry, and that's where we had our strongest witnesses.
Some of Garrison's strongest witnesses placing Shaw and Oswald together came from the small town of Clinton. Months before the assassination, register while being heckled by members of the White Citizens Council.
And all of a sudden, this big black limousine came into town, and the KKK and their friends in the sheriff's department thought this must be the FBI. They're probably on the side of these black people, and the black protesters knew